Chelsea from So Simple Home here today. I want to share with you all about your sewing machine. When you're starting to learn to sew, a lot of people get confused or distracted from the things that they find online about their sewing machine. There's so many parts to the sewing machine, so many names, some of them are very similar, and so it can get really confusing. So today we're going to take the confusion out of that and explain to you each of the parts of the machine and what they do and how they benefit you in your sewing. So first off, let me introduce you to my machine. This is Bernie. This is my old school Bernina. She's an 830. She was made in the 70s. My husband actually bought her for me for Christmas, probably 8 years ago, maybe longer. I love her. Okay, she gets a lot of use. Now, just because she's an older sewing machine doesn't mean she doesn't do the things that all the new sewing machines do. Every machine is very similar. It has all the same parts. They just might be located in different places. So one of the best things to do is to find your sewing manual that comes with your machine and use that to help you identify some of the parts if they look different than where mine are. If you do not have your manual, so let's say you are like me and you purchased your machine and it's older and it didn't come with a manual, you can actually just Google your machine's name or brand and the number. So I would just put Bernina 830 and it would pull up the manual for my sewing machine. So that's a little trick if you inherited a machine from someone, because that happens quite often and you just don't know anything about the machine. It's good to have the manual no matter what. Start from the basics, the beginning. Let's start at the top. Okay, you'll start with your spool pins. Those are these spools these pins right here. These actually hold a spool of thread. Now, this is an older machine. A lot of the older machines have their spool pins on the back side. That's totally normal. The new machines often will have their spool pin on the front or at the top. Maybe you lift like a little compartment and it's hidden underneath there. But wherever it's at, those are your spool pins. That's kind of where you'll start. Then you'll take your thread from your spool pins over to your thread guide. Now I'm going to turn my machine around here. Here's one of my thread guides. It would come up from this thread guide, my thread, up to here, down and around this thread guide, up through this thread guide, and down through my needle. So all of this, technically, we just call your thread guide. Okay? This right here is called your front thread guide. So if you're actually looking in your manual and you're not really sure what they're talking about, this is the front one. But your thread, in another video, will explain how to thread your machine. But your thread will go through each of these thread guides before it goes through your needle. And that's important. Oftentimes, the thread will come out of this front thread guide and it'll go from here to here and then through your needle, and then your machine keeps gunking up and you can't figure out what the problem is, and all the problem was you needed to rethread your machine. So I tell my students, if they're having a problem, the first two things that you do is rethread your machine. If that doesn't work, change your needle. 9 times out of 10, those two things will fix whatever the problem is with your machine. There's always something else that could come up, but 9 times out of 10, I have found that, especially with beginner sewers, that is where the problem is. Okay, so down here, we already said needle. So this is where our needle goes, and your machine usually is going to have some type of screw that will tighten or loosen your needle, and that's important. You want a nice tight needle so it doesn't fall out. This right here is called your presser foot, and your presser foot actually can come out of your machine, and you can change your presser feet. So this is just a regular presser foot. This is just for your regular sewing. There's a zipper foot, there's a ruffle foot, there's all sorts of different types of presser feet. Underneath our presser feet is our throat plate. Now on some machines, this plate will just pop right out, which is nice because you can clean underneath it really easily. On my machine, it doesn't pop right out. I have to unscrew this whole piece to get underneath it. Totally normal, but a little bit more work. Now underneath that, I'm going to move my presser foot here. You can feel and hopefully see a little bit, there's these teeth, and if I move my hand wheel, the teeth go up and down. Those are called feed dogs. Now feed dogs are really, really important in sewing because they are what feed your fabric through your machine, and your fabric goes from the front through to the back. So when I put my presser foot down with my presser foot lever on the back here, my fabric feeds through the machine because of my feed dogs. Now you can put your feed dogs down, and this is different in every machine. On my machine, it's over here and this knob, and I just move it and my feed dogs will go down and they won't come back up, okay? On other people's machines, it's different. Side, when we open up, we have our bobbin and our bobbin case, and I have a little thread on them. This is my bobbin, this is a silver bobbin, and this is my bobbin case. Now bobbin cases can look a little bit different, but for the most part they're going to look like this one. And bobbins can look a lot different. You can get plastic bobbins, you can get metal bobbins. Some bobbins are higher, some bobbins are squattier. It really depends on your machine. So this is an important part of understanding your sewing machine, is making sure that you have the proper bobbin for your bobbin case. Research it, look in your manual, make sure you know what bobbin case or what bobbin you need for your bobbin case, because not all bobbins fit with all bobbin cases. It's really, really an important thing. Now, some machines, especially newer machines, don't have a bobbin case because they have a drop-in bobbin. Usually it's up here with the throat plate. You remove the throat plate and you would just drop your bobbin in and then thread it through that way. And that just depends on your machine. I have an older machine, and so I have my bobbin case and my bobbin. So that's another thing you want to research, just to make sure that you're doing it correctly for your machine. Okay? All right, this piece right here, let's move on to this piece. This is the sewing arm. This is the arm of your machine. This is really important because a lot of times on patterns or projects or things are like the arm of your machine. That's what this is. It's the arm. Sometimes, especially on larger machines, you're going to have a piece that comes on and off the arm. My machine actually has one of those and I barely ever use it. It just expands the table of your sewing arm so you have more room. So especially if you're a quilter and you need more space to be working, that can be really helpful. I personally just don't use mine very often. That's just a personal preference. Okay, a few more things that we want to make sure we talk about. This one's important. This is your hand wheel. The hand wheel is usually located on the side of your machine, usually on the right hand side, and it moves. It's what moves your needle. So you can see as I'm moving my hand wheel, my needle's going up and down. The hand wheel is an important part of the sewing machine. If you want to sew slower, or you have a corner you're trying to go into, you're going to move your hand wheel towards your body so that that needle goes up and down, and you can stitch slowly and get right into your corners or stitch over a zipper or whatever you might be doing to ensure you don't, one, break your needle, but two, you have a much more even stitch. So that's what the hand wheel does. So these knobs are what control my stitch. What type of stitch it is, how big the stitch is, all of those things. Mine are on the side of my machine here. A lot of the newer machines have them across the top. Some of them are electronic or digital, so you just push a button up or down. But the idea behind them is the same. They usually have a number or a letter associated with them, so you know how big you're getting or how small you're getting. Just like 1, 2, 3 goes up, or ABC, same thing. So these ones on the side of my machine here do different things. So this first one is actually my needle position. So I can move this small one on the front here, and you can see my needle starts to move. So I might change my needle position if, let's say I'm going to do a zigzag, or excuse me, I'm going to do a zipper, and I'm putting my zipper foot in, and I want my needle to be all the way to the side to ensure that I don't sew over my zipper teeth. You might do that if you wanted to change your stitch length and or where your stitch position is on your machine. You want to be closer to your seam allowance, whatever. This back part of this actually changes the type of zigzag that I have. So either a tiny little satin stitch zigzag or all the way up to a really wide zigzag. So that's what this knob does on my machine. If I want to change the type of stitch on my machine, that is actually on the top of my machine here. And I move this lever over and I can change it to any of the designs that are up here. On my machine, I also have to change this lever. So it's telling me 1 through 20, and then I can switch it. A lot of the newer machines, it's just electronic, and you push the button, and sometimes there's a display or there's a picture, and you just go up to number 12 because you want this type of stitch. So another thing just to look in your user manual to see. But that's how I change the type of stitch other than a zigzag. And this one does the zigzag on my machine. This one actually right here is to make my buttonhole. So I would change around to the different numbers to do the different parts of my buttonhole. And buttonholes can be really complicated or really easy. It just depends on your level of experience and sometimes your machine, because some machines just really do buttonholes better. I'm going to say that honestly. But that's how I do my buttonhole. Your machine may just have it like with your different types of stitches. Again, it's something to look on your manual for. Then the last one right here is really important for me. It does two things. One, it's a back stitch. So I lift this up, and then my feed dogs go the opposite direction, and I can back stitch over stitching I've already done. And back stitch is important for helping to keep your threads from unthreading as you go. So I back stitch a lot. And then if I twist it, I'm actually changing, you might see these little numbers here, I'm changing the length of my stitch to be either wider or smaller. So if I have it all the way to 0, that's what I would use for my buttonhole. And that's a super teeny tiny stitch, and it's going to be a bugger to unpick. Bad choices. But if I have it higher, it's going to be a longer stitch. So if I want to base something, I'm going to come up all the way to 4, so I have a wider stitch. So stitch length, I usually like to keep it at about a 3 on my machine. Your machine might go 1 through 10, so you'd want to keep it about a 5 or a 6. But again, it depends on your project, the type of material you're using, to what your stitch length might be best for. All right, we're almost done. Up here, there's a couple other things. This right here is for threading my bobbin. I've seen machines do it lots of different ways. On my machine, here's my bobbin. I snap it in up here, and then I thread it through this. This is a bobbin threader, and then come through to my bobbin, wind my bobbin. Other machines, I have some older machines that actually have the bobbin winder on the side over here. Some machines, I'm trying to think where some of the newer ones do it. I feel like they do it on the front. So again, that's something to make sure that you look in your user manual, or even just get on Google and Google how to wind your bobbin for this machine, because every machine does their bobbin winding different, but you have to wind bobbins. And then the last one up here, this little knob for me is my tension. And the tension changes inside of my machine. Well, you can't see it. I guess I have to open this way. But this little knob changes how tight or how loose my thread is. Personally, I tell you never to touch your tension. A lot of people will say if you're doing gathers, or if you're doing, mostly it's gathers, to change your tension. I honestly very rarely change my tension unless I'm having a really big issue. Once again, usually 2 reasons that you're having problems with your machine. Either you're not threaded right, or your needle needs changed. If those 2 things aren't working, then I would go to your tension and see if you can't fix it that way. But I try not to bother my tension, because if I don't bother it, it usually is fine. One other thing is your foot pedal. Mine's obviously not plugged in at the moment, but this is what a foot pedal looks like. You can have a lot smaller foot pedal. This one's just a big foot pedal. But your foot pedal is important because it's what makes your machine go. So once it's plugged into my machine, I control my machine with my foot. Now there are newer machines. In fact, one of my sewing students has a machine where you just push a button and it sews for you. And she doesn't have to use a foot pedal at all. It comes with one and she can, but she has the option not to use it. So she really likes that, and she can control the speed of her stitch as well. So the new machines have a lot more power. But when it comes to your foot pedal, the biggest thing you need to know is the harder you push, the faster you go. Just like when driving a car. If you push really hard, you're gonna go really fast. If you push real light, you're not gonna go as fast. So if you have a foot pedal, push light to begin with, and as you get used to the idea of sewing, you can push a little harder and you'll be more successful. I think we covered everything. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of a better understanding of your sewing machine. If you have questions or comments, leave them down below and I will try and get to them, or you can always contact me on our website, sewsimplehome.com. But I hope this helps you understand your sewing machine a little bit better and take some of the fear out of starting to sew. We'll see you next time.